I didn't respond to the video reasonable questions for anti-SJWs because I have pretty limited time to make videos. I decided to set aside a little time to respond to Philip Moriarty's response to the responses, though.
What I want to point out, first of all, is I do think that this division between SJWs and anti-SJWs is problematic.
So I take it you'll be attempting to broker the peace here? Soften that division?
Similarly with left-wing and right-wing politics, I would place my politics left of centre.
Color me surprised. Here's the thing about the opposition to social justice warriors. There are many who are conservative, and there are many who are liberal. I've even seen people who are conservative and people who are liberal collaborating on videos that are responses to social justice warrior videos. Now, do social justice warriors have that range of viewpoints? Or do they pretty much all lean to the left?
And the other thing I got for the tone I got from this is an awful lot of people took it very personally, which I found interesting, given that, again, it's meant to be the it's meant to be the SJW camp. That's the hypersensitive one.
Have any anti-SJWs made videos complaining at length about rude commentary and trolling?
So, the difficulty is I had certain people in mind, and perhaps that's unfair.
No, in fact, that's perfectly fair. You can create commentary about a general point of view, but you can also create commentary about a specific point of view or a particular person. Why would you say that's unfair? In your video, you often complain about sweeping generalizations, and in your next breath, you're going to tell me why you do. So why would you say that's unfair?
I certainly wouldn't ever suggest that the types of criticism I was putting forward are universal. How could they be? How could they be universal to a particular group?
It's not a particular group, Phil. It is the opposition to a group. And it's not even that, really. It is the opposition to a certain set of values and perspectives.
And okay, I don't really care if my questions have been misinterpreted a little bit. That's partly my fault. Largely my fault. As long as it's seeded some discussion, and it's seeded some discussion.
The discussion was already there, but you can congratulate yourself if you want.
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR? The argument was, well, we can do both. Yes, you can do both, but don't conflate the two. That's the point I was making.
Was it? Your question didn't indicate that at all. Let's hear it again.
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
That doesn't suggest anything about conflating the two. It doesn't even hint at it.
Yes, you can have your identity over here and your identity over here, but it's when you conflate those two, when there's a debate happening, when there's an argument happening, and you resort to the playground. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen on both sides. I'm not saying it doesn't happen on both sides. But the argument continually comes, I guess, because some of this is spreading from what was an atheist community, I guess, if we must use the community term. The argument comes that we're rational, this is logical, those SJWs aren't rational.
This is nonsense. And it's funny to hear you go on about this after talking about how other people take things personally. Suppose in a response video I were to say, this person actually believes in the gender wage gap, and mind my manners and maintain a calm tone of voice. That would not make my point any more valid than if I were to say, can you believe that this moronic, pointy-headed dipshit actually believes in the gender wage gap? I've said the same thing, just more colorfully.
Kind of trashy, non-impact words that it's just schoolyard crap, right? That isn't acceptable. But using words like racist and sexist to smear somebody's entire subscriber base, the kind of words that have tangible impact, that get people sacked from their jobs, that's okay, is it? That's all right to use that kind of language.
Noel, you describe these things as these words as having no impact. Here's an example where there's a major impact.
I read that article, Phil. I watched an interview with the kid's mom, and what she's talking about is bullying in school. The kid in the article you're using was bullied and harassed for years in person by kids he knew, and those same kids were the ones using social media as a tool to harass him. This article is not about strangers on YouTube.
And, you know, I'm grey of beard and long in the tooth and wizened of hair and etc., etc. I'm old enough to remember time before the internet. My kids, however, it's absolutely clear that for them, their sort of online life and their real life, if we must put it in those terms, are conflated. So the idea that something over here, you can, in terms of the online activity, you can just switch off. For me, yeah, that's fine. Probably for you, Noel, as well. I don't know if we're quite of the same vintage. We might be. That's something we can switch off from, not for our kids.
I thought we were talking about social justice warriors and their opposition. You have cunningly switched topics to kids cyberbullying one another. What we were talking about was grown adults putting their opinions online for the world to see. And I'm not about to say that insults have to be avoided. If you were to say that you think the amazing atheist is a no-good, low-down, dirty, rotten, yellow-bellied, narcissistic douchebag of a bullshit slinger, I would not tell you to mind your manners. And that's not the best example, because in some videos I think that the amazing atheist comes off as a no-good, low-down, yellow-bellied, narcissistic douchebag of a bullshit slinger. And I like the guy. Better example, I like Blair White a lot. And I have seen a lot of YouTube videos that call her a cunt. Now, that's something I wouldn't say. And it's something I don't like to hear. But I'm not going to tell people to mind their manners and watch their language. I think Blair can take it. And she does. And she has no choice if she's going to put her opinion online for public examination. Something else that really gets under my skin is the social justice warrior propensity for turning to racist insults. When black people don't fall into line with the politically correct point of view, they're often called house niggers and Uncle Toms and coons. How are they supposed to cope with that? By telling people not to say that? Nah. A talented YouTuber that I appreciate is called Some Black Guy. And he made a video with himself and several other black YouTubers all proudly proclaiming their status as coons. They do not need the consideration of you and your cohorts. I tell you what, any social justice warrior that really can't cope with it can retreat to a safe space by simply not logging in. The ones that do continue, even if they're bitching and whining, even if they're saying things I disagree with, I can still respect that. Even if I happen to throw an insult their way, I can still respect that. And to give you one more example from someone who is not on the anti-SJW side, here's the one janitor. I don't happen to appreciate the one janitor, but what he's about to say here about rude commentary is just seriously cool.
I know a lot of you don't care what I have to say. You're just, here to just yell at me and just believe what you want to believe. And that's fine. Do what you want to do. But my videos aren't really for those people. And I have to remember who my videos are for and provide, that kind of content for the people that came here for.
Now, later on in the video, you say this.
On the other hand, my position that to send anybody, let alone a victim of sexual abuse, but to send anybody a tweet or a message or an email or whatever that reads, "I wouldn't even rape you," is the action of an odious turd of a man.
No need to clarify. I found that one to be in pretty poor taste myself. I wasn't as upset by it as you were, but you don't have to tiptoe around like your greatest fear is hurting someone's fragile feelings. If he said something that offensive, then go ahead and respond in kind.
It's not so much the avatar itself that's the problem. Where the problem is, and where the rank hypocrisy is if somebody hiding behind that avatar to throw out abuse and to slag off others while simultaneously complaining that those people are delicate flowers, precious snowflakes, etc.
I've got more to say about the avatars and pseudonyms later. But the terms, so that you understand them, the terms special snowflake and delicate flower were not coined to describe people who complain about criticism. They were coined to describe people who demand special treatment, like modified language or trigger warnings or safe spaces. Those are the special snowflakes.
Okay, so this is a common response to this particular question. And as I said, I was trying to get representative responses instead of, address every single question and have a 42-hour-long video or whatever.
If someone right now was like, oh, she seems like a very smart activist, I am going to check out her Twitter, the first thing they will see is, what if butts had boobs?
The question has come back because it's Twitter. But note what I say. I say, when I check out your online activity, for example, Twitter. Twitter is but one example, okay? Yes, it's 140 characters. I used to have a Twitter account and I killed my Twitter account because that 140 character format is pretty well custom built to get you to descend to the playground very, very quickly.
Then why the hell was that your example? You're carrying on like people just deliberately misrepresented you. What the hell happened to this?
And okay, I don't really care if my questions have been misinterpreted a little bit. That's partly my fault. Largely my fault.
Anyway, a little aside here for people who are having trouble debating on Twitter, because sometimes you have an answer that cannot be put into 140 characters. There's a workaround for that. If you have a longer response than that, type it out somewhere else in Word or whatever, and then take a shot of your screen, or that little piece of your screen, better yet, and attach that image to your tweet. Then you've got your full response, in spite of the 140 character limit.
Well, if I look at TJ Kirk, that's preaching. That's the closest thing to televangelism I think I've seen, coming from a self-avowed atheist. That's an incredibly dramatic, incredibly powerful. He's all over the place. He's putting it across so emotively. In some ways, I respect that. It strikes me as very odd that people who go, it's all about the reason, it's all about the logic, or to put emotion to one side. And then you look at TJ Kirk for just a few minutes, and that man's full of passion.
People have said that. People have claimed to set emotion to one side, and then they don't do it. But that's not really the point. People who have said that are explaining their point about as well as you explain most of yours, Phil. So I'll reframe it for you. It's not that social justice warriors are emotional. It's that they rely on emotion. You are quite right that anti-SJWs can get very passionate, and so it's no problem that social justice warriors get emotional and passionate. In fact, I encourage them to do so. But so many of them become passionate and emotional with no trace of logic or reason along with it. Because the two are not mutually exclusive. You can make a logical and reasonable argument while being passionate about it. And for anyone wanting to bitch about it, I realize that there are anti-SJW channels that do nothing but rant. And some of them even admit it. A lot of those I just don't subscribe to because I guess I don't feel they're robust enough for me. Robust is a fun word. I heard that recently in another video.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself? The most extreme or the weakest feminist position, the most extreme or the weakest feminist position.
Those points of view that are not robust enough for your friend Christy Winters, those points of view that, in her words, are weak and extreme, they are not uncommon. And if Christie is to be believed, they are not as valid. Perhaps it is because they lack the logic and rationality that might make them robust. And it seems to a lot of people that the weak and extreme points of view are much, much more common than the robust points of view. That's what people are complaining about when they talk about a lack of logic.
That doesn't address the point, Mr. Kirk. The point here is very clear. We have one camp, if we must use those terms, which is claiming that their arguments are rational, evidence-based and logical. Now, if that isn't the case, fine, let's put that to bed. Let's forget about that and let's just accept that in both camps, the arguments are sometimes rather more emotional and less grounded in rationality and logic. And sometimes in both camps, there are appeals to the heart rather than the mind.
Appeal to the heart rather than to the mind. You can do both. And you can, in fact, do both at the same time. If you are passionate and you are right, then you are still right. If you are passionate and you are wrong, then you are still wrong. The appeal to rationality is an invitation for the audience to examine the views based on the points that are being made. If someone is loud and crude while making a point, the point is no less valid.
I hope you don't mind me calling you teacher. I'm Philip, by the way.
Well, I'm TJ Kirk, and this is my face. See? So I'm not hiding behind shit.
Well done. Delighted to see it. Though I believe that you weren't quite always as keen to reveal your identity. Might be wrong there. But anyway, glad that you're doing it now. Maybe you can encourage more to do that. Maybe you can point out to those who leave tons of abusive comments and vitriol and bile under videos, complaining about others being delicate flowers while they cravenly hide behind an avatar and a pseudonym. Maybe you can explain to them that they should follow your example and go, this is my face, this is who I am, I'm standing behind my arguments, I'm having the courage of my convictions, instead of tearing into others for being delicate flowers when they lack the courage of their convictions and can't even put their name or their face to their slurs.
Hey, this is my face, and my name is Matthew Brown. I'm not hiding behind a pseudonym or an avatar either. But for those of you who do use pseudonyms and avatars, I am not going to encourage you to follow my example. Why? Because I know what Mr. Wizard here doesn't. You don't use those masks to protect your feelings. You're using them to protect your identity. You use them to protect yourself from real attack. Mr. Moriarty's nemesis, Thunderfoot, had people campaign to have him fired. And why? Because he opposes social justice values. Blair White had people trying to post her family's addresses online so that they could become targets too.
Some people in particular, part of Black Lives Matter, chose to threaten to dox me. They had doxed dozens and dozens of people before me, and they were getting people fired from their jobs and harassing their families, and my family was starting to be contacted. So as a result, I did go on a social media blackout for a while.
That shouldn't happen to anyone. Mr. Moriarty, people on your side can get vicious. And this is a complete and total logic misfire. I mean, you're trying to convince us that people hide behind these masks so that they can send tons of abusive comments and vitriol and bile. If they drop the masks, will you suddenly accept the tons of abusive comments, vitriol, and bile? No. Nothing about your other argument will change. And I know you understand that, because you said so yourself.
But don't you think this question is kind of ironic when at least two of the people asking questions in your video are hiding behind cartoons?
For me at least, I can't speak for the others, but for me at least there's a key difference here. There's a universe of difference in somebody using an avatar and a pseudonym to post comments and to be reasonable, and somebody else using an avatar and a pseudonym as a shield behind which to hide so they can fire off torrents of abuse.
So, avatars are okay if you're reasonable, and they're not okay if you're unreasonable. So what's to be gained if someone that you consider unreasonable steps out from behind the mask? Will that suddenly make them less unreasonable in your eyes? Talk about rank hypocrisy. You're trying to make a case for calm, rational debate, while at the same time saying, come on out where we can see you. Fight like a man. Put your livelihood, your career, your reputation, and maybe even your personal safety at risk so that I can condemn you directly for talking trash on my friends. It's amazing that you made a case against cyberbullying, and then you demand that people forego the protection they have against real persecution. Now that's real hypocrisy.